Choosing my wife over my own mother was something I never envisioned happening on Christmas of all nights. Looking back, it wasn't even that final, awful slap that ended 27 years of pretending we were a happy family. It was actually the innocent question my 11-year-old daughter asked right after. That winter night in Ohio was brutally cold. The kind of bitter freeze that turned every breath into a white cloud and made the snow squeak under my boots. My mother's house was glowing with perfect holiday lights, looking like a postcard. Anyone driving by would have thought we were completely happy. I almost believed it myself, as Emily sat next to me in the truck, carefully smoothing out a hand-decorated gift bag. "Do you really think they will like them?" Emily asked me, her voice quiet. I forced a reassuring smile and told her they would have to be crazy not to. She gave a soft laugh, though I could easily catch the nervous edge underneath it. For the last 3 weeks, she and our daughter Lily had spent every single evening at the kitchen table, crafting ornaments by hand. They made little wooden snowflakes, painted red cardinals, and stitched felt stars, burning tiny names into each one with a cheap wood-burning tool. It wasn't about the money. It was about the time and the love they poured into them. Walking inside, the warm scent of baked hams, cinnamon, and fresh rolls wrapped around us while Frank Sinatra played softly in the background. My younger brother Kevin greeted me with a quick hug and a warm wish for a Merry Christmas. Under the tree, his wife Denise was busy arranging expensive designer gift bags from high-end department stores. She barely even looked up at us. When she spotted our simple paper bag, a cold, empty smile crossed her face as she made a passive-aggressive comment about us making gifts yet again. Lily was beaming with pride, saying she had made something for everyone. Emily squeezed her shoulder, and watching them filled me with a deep sense of gratitude. For nearly 15 years, we feared we would never have children. After 2 painful miscarriages and endless tears, Lily finally arrived, just as we had almost given up all hope. Every single holiday season with our daughter felt like an absolute miracle to us. Lily stepped forward and carefully handed Denise her first gift, which was a beautifully painted red wooden cardinal. Denise barely glanced at it, forced a dry laugh, and muttered a sarcastic comment about it being homemade. The room fell silent as she set it carelessly on the coffee table instead of hanging it on the tree. She even went as far as saying that homemade gifts are what people do when they cannot afford real presents. Emily tried to keep her composure, saying they were made with love, but Denise just shrugged it off with another cruel remark. My mother sat nearby, silently sipping her wine. I had watched her play this passive role for years. The insults were never loud enough to trigger an outright screaming match, but they always left a deep, painful bruise. For years, I had repeatedly convinced myself that keeping the peace was better than ruining Christmas. Emily, always so incredibly strong, just let the comments slide to protect our family. As the tension hung in the air, Lily pulled gently on Emily's sleeve, asking if her aunt did not like the gift. With heartbreaking patience, Emily whispered that some people just express their excitement in a different way. I only wish that were true. When dinner finally began, the talk drifted to luxury cars and spring vacations. Then, with a casual cruelty that made my blood run cold, Denise looked directly at Emily and sneered. A few uncomfortable chuckles echoed around the dining room table as everyone tried to brush off Denise's cruel remark. Setting her fork down slowly, Emily kept her voice remarkably steady and simply asked Denise to stop. No shouting, no retaliation, just a quiet request. But my mother, Margaret, suddenly scraped her chair back, marched over, and struck Emily across the face with a sickening, loud crack. The room went completely numb. As Emily stood there, shocked, my mother glared at her and spat out that Denise was right, calling her trailer trash. She ordered Emily to take our daughter and leave the house immediately. In the dead silence, the grandfather clock ticked away, but then I heard my daughter's tearful, quiet voice calling out to me. My heart completely shattered when Lily looked up at me and asked if her grandmother was kicking us out because her mother was poor. Kneeling down by her chair, I took both of her small, trembling hands in mine. I looked deep into her tear-filled eyes and told her that Grandma had simply forgotten what real kindness looked like. When I stood up, the silence in the room was deafening. Kevin was paralyzed with shock, while Denise sat with her arms crossed, looking incredibly smug. My mother stood there waiting for me to apologize to her. Instead, I ignored her completely and went to Emily, whose cheek was already turning a bright, angry red. I helped her into her winter coat while Lily quietly put her backpack on. Down on the floor, hidden beneath the edge of the dining table, lay Lily's hand-painted ornament, shattered into pieces during the chaos. I knelt down on the cold floor and gathered up every single broken shard, cradling them gently in my hands. I placed the fragments back inside our small cardboard craft box, gathered our things, and walked out to the truck without saying a single word. No dramatic goodbyes, no useless threats. The drive back home to Columbus felt like a lifetime as snow swirled across the dark highway. For over 20 minutes, we sat in heavy silence. When Emily finally whispered an apology, my voice cracked as I told her I was the one who should be sorry for asking her to endure this for 27 long years. Gently reaching across the console, Emily held my hand tightly for the remainder of the long, silent drive home. Once we arrived, I carried a sleeping Lily to the couch, wrapping her in her favorite blanket, while Emily went upstairs to rest. I retreated to the cold garage to clear my head. Tucked away underneath my heavy toolbox was an old, yellowed envelope, written in my late father's hand. I pulled out the single piece of paper and read the words he had left for me years ago. It felt less like simple advice now and more like an ominous warning about having to choose between peace and family. After reading it 3 times, I put it back, ignored the constant buzzing of missed calls on my phone, and finally went to sleep. A fresh blanket of white snow covered the entire backyard the following morning as I poured myself a hot cup of coffee. Picking up my phone from the counter, I saw 32 missed calls and a single voicemail from my mother. Her voice sounded fragile and trembling as she pleaded for me to call her back. For the first time in 27 years, I chose to do absolutely nothing. I wish I could say that ignoring her was easy, but it felt incredibly heavy. My decades-old instinct urged me to grab my keys and rush over to fix everything just like I always did. But as I looked out the window, I saw Lily running around in her bright blue coat, trying to make the largest snow angel she possibly could. Watching from the kitchen window, I saw Emily step out onto the back porch holding 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate for herself and Lily. Their laughter drifted up muffled by the glass, and a sudden realization washed over me. For the first time in my life, I truly understood that my actual family consisted of only 3 people. When the phone started ringing again, I simply flipped it face down on the counter. Emily came back inside shortly after and told me I didn't need to make any big decisions today. I smiled sadly, telling her I wasn't deciding anything, I was just doing nothing. It sounded so simple, but refusing to rescue everyone else was the hardest thing I had ever done. It had been my unspoken job every November to clean my mother's furnace burners, replace the air filters, and inspect the ignition system. I did it because if I didn't step up, absolutely nobody else would. I deleted Kevin's urgent voicemail, watching as another severe winter storm began to roll across the flat Ohio countryside. The news warned of sub-zero temperatures overnight, which normally would have sent me rushing out the door with my tools. Instead, I stayed put and helped Lily finish building a wooden birdhouse she wanted to hang outside. As Emily watched us work from the warm kitchen, Lily looked up at me and asked if her grandmother was still mad, wondering why we weren't going over to help. Children always seem to ask the exact questions that adults spend their entire lives trying to dance around. I sat down next to Lily on the workbench, explaining that while helping someone is a beautiful gift, it stops being a gift when they think they can treat you terribly and still expect your help. Lily thought about it for a second, saying she felt Emily always gave Grandma gifts only for Grandma to break them. Watching Emily hang treats for the birds in the yard, I quietly agreed that some people never appreciate what they have until it is gone. That night, Kevin tried calling me 6 times, but I let it ring. The next morning, the news reported burst pipes across the city, and a weary voicemail from Kevin confirmed the basement was flooded. The frantic voicemail from my brother explained that they had finally tracked down an emergency plumber, but the holiday rates were absolutely astronomical. Of course, I knew exactly what the problem was. The main water shutoff valve was tucked away behind a heavy storage shelf in Margaret's utility room, right where I had placed a bright yellow tag on it years ago. No one had ever bothered to look. I deleted the message, feeling a quiet sting that had nothing to do with the money. It was just the exhausting realization of how many years I had spent quietly fixing things while everyone else remained helpless. My wife Emily saw the tension in my face and whispered that I could still go help them. I told her I knew that, but continuing to shield them would only prolong the lie. Gently closing the distance between us, Emily reached out and squeezed my hand with a warmth that instantly grounded me. She told me she was not asking me to choose her over my mother, but I whispered back that I already had. Later that afternoon, we took our daughter Lily sledding. Her laughter echoed across the snow as she struggled to climb back up the hill. She slipped her cold hand into mine and said she liked this Christmas much better. I stopped asking if she meant that even after everything. She simply nodded and said, "Nobody yelled today." Those words haunted me. I realized my little girl was already measuring happiness by the absence of conflict. By mid-January, the frantic calls finally slowed, replaced by a forwarded property tax reminder. The official mail on the counter was actually meant for my mother, forwarded to us because I had handled her affairs for a decade. I quietly slipped a document into a kitchen drawer. It was not out of malice, but an acknowledgement that her life was no longer my burden to carry. For once, my family would have to manage the daily tasks that had always magically sorted themselves out. A few days later, while fixing a loose cabinet hinge, a heavy pounding rattled our front door glass. It was Kevin, looking exhausted. He spat that I had some nerve. I offered a quiet morning greeting, but he snapped that our mother was drowning in paperwork while I acted like nothing happened. I calmly reminded him that I was not the one who made her slap my wife. Kevin grimaced, insisting that the physical assault had nothing to do with my refusal to help. "But I think that is exactly what this is about," I answered calmly. He rubbed his face in frustration, arguing that I had always taken care of these things and told me to just go fix it. In the past, those words would have worked. Not anymore. I told him I could not do it. His anger turned to utter disbelief, asking if I really could not or if I simply would not. I did not argue. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head, admitting he did not even know where to begin. Looking at his slumped shoulders, I realized he was telling the truth. He honestly did not know because he had never had to care. My eyes drifted toward the basement door. Down those wooden stairs sat a battered cardboard file box that I had slowly filled over the years. It contained every receipt, utility bill, repair invoice, and medical schedule that had kept our mother's life running while everyone else looked the other way. I turned back to Kevin and quietly suggested that maybe it was finally time for him to learn how to do this. He stood frozen on my porch, peering past me toward that basement door. He asked what file box I was talking about, and I told him it was the one explaining why he was so helpless now. He frowned, telling me he did not need a lecture, but I assured him I had no intention of giving him one. For a brief second, I actually considered just shutting the front door in his face, although a strong urge told me to lock the door. I remembered how my years of polite silence had only enabled this mess. Remaining quiet was not kindness, even if I had once convinced myself it was. "Come inside," I said, stepping aside. Emily looked up from the kitchen. She did not say a word, giving only a polite nod before slipping upstairs to help Lily. I caught Kevin watching her, his eyes lingering on her cheek where the faint shadow of our mother's slap was still visible. He looked down, stammering that he had no idea she would do that. I told him I knew, but he swallowed hard and insisted he truly had not known. I believed him, but his ignorance did not erase the reality. I opened the basement door, walked down, and pulled the old box from beneath my workbench. There was nothing remarkable about the dusty cardboard box, save for the words "Mom's House" scrawled across the front in black marker. I carried it up to the dining room and set it down on the table. Kevin let out a dry, disbelieving laugh, asking if I was joking, but I looked at him and said I was not. He reached out and lifted the lid. Inside was a meticulous archive of folders organized by year from 2014 all the way to the present. He pulled out the first one, packed with property tax documents. I explained that I had paid those whenever her pension fell short. He began digging deeper, uncovering records of roof repairs, furnace maintenance, insurance renewals, prescription co-pays, and parking stubs from dozens of hospital trips. My brother froze his fingers, pausing on the papers, as quiet confusion took over his voice. He whispered that he did not understand, and I replied softly that he was never supposed to. When he asked what I meant, I told him I never wanted anyone to carry a burden of guilt. He stared at me, realizing that every time our mother had thanked him for help, she was unknowingly thanking me. He sank into a chair. He admitted he assumed she managed on her own, and I told him she believed that too because I never wanted her to feel like a burden. Kevin asked in a hushed voice how much it had all cost. I told him I had stopped adding it up years ago, but when he pressed, I confessed it was well over $70,000. Kevin looked up instantly, his expression completely stunned by the sheer scale of that figure. "What?" he breathed. I explained that this was spread over 12 years, totaling $70,000, give or take. He ran both hands through his hair, muttering that he had no idea. I told him I knew. He picked up another folder and found a spiral notebook. When he asked what it was, I told him it was my maintenance log. He flipped it open, scanning entries about furnace burners leaking, valves, and roof damage. Every page was a record of quiet labor. He looked up, pale, asking if I really visited once a week. He whispered that he lived 15 minutes away. Before I could say a word, Denise barged through our front door without knocking. Scanning the dining room table with an irritated expression, Denise demanded to know what all this paperwork was about. Kevin stayed silent, so she picked up a couple of receipts, rolling her eyes. She mocked me for keeping records, but I told her I always do. She crossed her arms, arguing that children are supposed to help their parents. I nodded, agreeing that they should. She pointed at me, telling me to stop playing the martyr. I looked at her calmly, saying I never claimed we shouldn't help. When she demanded to know my point, I gently closed the folder in front of her. I explained there is a vast difference between choosing to help someone and having them believe they are entitled to it. She just scoffed, claiming it was the same thing. Locking my gaze onto hers, I quietly told Denise that she was dead wrong. The dining room fell into a heavy silence. Kevin looked between us, then stared back at the box, his shoulders sagging. He whispered that I had never once asked them for a single dime, and I confirmed that I had not. He pointed out that I had never even brought it up. When he asked why, I gave a humorless smile, explaining that I believed that was what family did. He looked as though I had physically struck him, stammering that he should have helped. I told him he should have known. Before anyone could speak, my phone buzzed with a call from our family attorney, Richard Lawson. I stepped into the hallway to answer, hearing his measured voice. Richard explained that my mother had spent the morning grilling him about the family trust. I told him I had fully expected that. He paused, then revealed that she was considering challenging my decisions as successor trustee. I let out a dry laugh, asking what decisions I had even made. Richard agreed, sighing as he told her I had not exercised any extraordinary authority. In fact, I had gone far beyond what was required. I leaned against the wall, asking if she believed him. He admitted she did not. He paused, reminding me that in his 20 years representing us, he had never seen anyone do so much. Looking through the doorway, I saw Kevin staring at the paperwork while Denise stood silent. Richard added that it was time everyone knew why my father appointed me. Once the call ended, I lingered in the quiet hallway as the gravity of my father's true legacy settled over me. He had not just left me with legal duties. He had left me with something far more valuable. Permission. It was the permission to finally stop equating endless self-sacrifice with love. When I walked back into the dining room, Kevin looked up, asking what we should do now. I looked at the cardboard box and then at my brother. "Now," I said softly, "you learned something our father never wanted either of us to forget." I walked over to the old cabinet in the corner. Behind a stack of photo albums lay a faded envelope in my dad's familiar script. I had carried his words alone for years, but they were no longer mine to bear. I did not open the letter. I simply rested my hand on the paper. "No, we are not ready for that yet," I told him, watching Kevin's face fall. He muttered that he thought our dad wanted us to know. "He did," I said, sliding the thick envelope back into the cabinet drawer. "But there are things you need to see first." The next morning, I drove to Richard Lawson's office in downtown Columbus. I had not wanted to go. After the disaster at Christmas, another family battle was the last thing I wanted. Richard welcomed me with the same calm handshake he had used for years. He had helped my parents with their estate plan after Dad's heart diagnosis, and he knew that trust better than anyone. "Margaret is here," he murmured. I figured she would be. And Denise insisted on coming too. That did not surprise me either. I quietly followed him into the conference room. Sitting across from her, I noticed my mother looked far older than she had just 3 weeks ago. The usual confidence she brought into any room was entirely gone. Denise, on the other hand, still carried herself like someone who always expected to win. She barely even looked at me. Richard closed the door and sat down before a thick binder. "So," he began, "I have reviewed every single document related to the Carter family trust." Denise leaned forward and said, "Good." Richard ignored her. "I have also reviewed the financial records that Mr. Carter voluntarily provided." He opened the binder. Property tax payments, insurance premiums, roof repairs, furnace maintenance, medical transportation, emergency plumbing and electrical work. It went on page after page. With every document Richard turned, the room grew noticeably quieter. Finally, he closed the thick binder. "I have reached one conclusion," he said. We all waited. He looked directly at my mother. "David has done substantially more than the trust required." Denise crossed her arms. "So?" Richard did not even look at her. "The trust obligated him to manage the property responsibly." He paused. "It never required him to spend his own retirement savings to maintain your lifestyle." My mother blinked. "What do you mean?" Richard folded his hands. "The trust protects your right to live in the house, yes. It does not require David to personally pay expenses that exceeded your available income." Silence fell. "If David had acted strictly as trustee," he said, letting the sentence hang, "he would have advised selling the property years ago," Richard said, and I saw the color drain from my mother's face. "What?" she gasped. "The taxes, insurance, and emergency repairs far exceeded what the house could sustain." Richard looked at me briefly before continuing. "Instead, David quietly paid those costs himself." Denise finally spoke. "Well, that is what family does." Richard looked at her for the first time. "No," he said quietly but firmly. "Family helps because they choose to." He closed the binder. "Entitlement is something entirely different." Nobody argued, not even Denise. My mother just stared at the polished wooden table, whispering that she did not know. I believed her. She truly had not known. And somehow that made everything feel so much sadder. Reaching for another folder, Richard spoke quietly. "There is one more matter." He slid a copy of the trust toward my mother. "Your husband selected David as trustee because he knew David would make careful, compassionate decisions." My mother slowly looked up. So Harold knew. He knew David's character. Richard smiled gently, and after reviewing 12 years of records, he looked toward me. "I would say he chose wisely." No one spoke for several long seconds. Finally, Denise pushed back her chair. "So that is it?" Richard nodded. "There is no legal claim against David. If you filed one, it would almost certainly fail." She looked frustrated. "But he stopped helping." Knowing I had been assaulted and my wife publicly humiliated, Richard's calm expression never changed. "A court would likely consider his choice understandable," Richard added quietly. Denise had nothing left to say. The meeting ended without any dramatic shouting or victory speeches. It was just people standing up carrying truths that suddenly felt much heavier than they had an hour ago. Outside, Kevin caught up with me in the parking lot. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You do not owe me anything today," I replied. "I do," he rubbed his neck. "I kept thinking Mom depended on the house." I looked at him. "Turns out she depended on you," he said. I smiled faintly. "No, she depended on the version of me that never said no." Kevin nodded slowly. "I do not think I ever saw what you were doing." "I made sure you did not," I said. We stood there a minute before parting, and my life settled into an unfamiliar rhythm. The daily phone calls suddenly stopped, bringing a quiet peace to our home. Emily started laughing much more. Lily stopped asking if Grandma hated us, and instead, she began talking about school again. One Saturday afternoon, she came running into the garage while I was organizing my old tools. "Dad," she waved a sheet of paper over her head, "I won!" "What did you win, sweetie?" I asked. "My ornament," she handed me the letter. Her school had held a winter arts contest before Christmas break, but the judging had been delayed. Now the results were finally here. First place for the very hand-painted cardinal ornament Denise had laughed at. Emily read the letter twice before smiling. "I am so proud of you." Lily looked up. "Do you think Grandma would like it now?" Emily hesitated. Kneeling down beside her, Emily looked into Lily's eyes. "I hope one day she will understand why it mattered," she whispered. That answer stayed with me, not because it promised anything, but because Emily still chose to hope after everything we went through. Spring slowly replaced winter. The snow melted and the trees turned green again. Our life became quieter than it had been in years. One evening, while I was grilling burgers in the backyard, Kevin called. His voice sounded tired. "Mom wants me to ask you something." I waited. "She wants to know if she could see Lily." I looked through the window. Emily and Lily were making lemonade, laughing together. The sight filled me with both peace and caution. "I will think about it," I told him. "She knows she does not deserve it," Kevin added. "I know," I answered, feeling the weight of the moment. A long silence followed before Kevin said something I never expected. "David," he said. "Yeah? I think she is finally starting to understand what she really lost that night." After hanging up, I stood alone in the yard until the sun dipped below the trees. A few days later, an envelope arrived. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Margaret Carter. Inside was a single sheet of paper with no excuse and no explanation, just one handwritten sentence, asking if she could come to our 4th of July cookout. I folded the note and slipped it back, staring at it for a long time. Some wounds heal quickly, while others need more than an apology. Some decisions cannot be made by the person who was hurt the least. Looking through the window at Lily, I knew that if anyone deserved to decide what happened next, it was not me. The 4th of July arrived, warmer than predicted. By noon, the backyard smelled of charcoal, fresh-cut grass, and Emily's homemade potato salad. Lily ran through the sprinkler with 2 girls from next door, laughing so hard she nearly slipped on the wet lawn. Every few minutes, she would stop just long enough to check on the burgers before running off again. Watching her laugh without looking over her shoulder was something I still was not used to. Peace had become completely unfamiliar. Kevin arrived first, carrying a bowl of baked beans and looking incredibly awkward standing at our back gate. "Are you sure this is okay?" Kevin asked as he walked in. "I invited you," I said. "I was not talking about me," he replied. I knew exactly what he meant. Before I could answer, a car slowly pulled into the driveway, and Margaret climbed out alone. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, just older. She was not wearing her usual expensive jewelry, her hair was unstyled, and she wore a simple blue blouse with comfortable shoes. In her hands was a small box, wrapped in plain brown paper. For a moment, nobody moved. Emily quietly reached for my hand and I squeezed it. "It is your call," she whispered. "No," I said softly, "it is ours." Margaret walked across the yard, taking one careful step at a time. Stopping just a few feet away from us, she did not try to hug anyone. She did not even look at me first. Instead, she looked directly at Emily. "I owe you something I have never given you," she said. Emily just waited. "My respect." The words hung heavily in the warm summer air. Margaret took a slow breath. "I have practiced this speech for weeks." She looked around our backyard. "Would everyone mind if I said it now?" Nobody said a word. Kevin quietly pulled out a chair for her, but she did not sit. Instead, she stood right in front of us, unfolding a single sheet of paper from her pocket. Her hands shook. "I spent most of my life pretending I came from somewhere better than I did." She looked down. "My father drank away almost everything. We lived in a trailer for years." My wife Emily looked completely surprised, and so did Kevin. Honestly, I hated hearing this. Margaret's voice cracked. "I promised myself I would never be poor again," she paused. "Somewhere along the way, I stopped fearing poverty." She looked directly at Emily. "I started fearing people who reminded me of it." A heavy silence settled over our backyard. "I judged you before I ever knew you." She took another breath. "I convinced myself that where you grew up mattered more than the kind of woman you became." She wiped at her eye. "When Denise made jokes," she shook her head, "I should have stopped her. Instead, I joined her." Her eyes finally met Emily's. "The slap," she closed her eyes, "it is something I will regret for the rest of my life." Emily did not speak. Margaret turned toward Lily. "I also hurt someone who had done nothing except love her grandmother." Seeing my mother step forward, Lily instinctively moved closer to Emily, seeking safety. Margaret slowly held out a small gift box, her hands trembling slightly. "I understand if you never forgive me," she said softly, "but I brought something." She handed it to Emily, who looked at me for permission. I gave a gentle nod. As Emily carefully untied the ribbon, we saw the little wooden cardinal ornament inside. Lily gasped. It's mine. It was. The paint had been touched up and the ribbon replaced, but a tiny crack was still visible. I couldn't make it perfect again, Margaret whispered, her shoulders sagging. But I picked up every single piece after you left. Emily stared at her in disbelief, realizing my mother had kept every fragment. Perhaps Margaret hoped that someday she would learn how to fix what she had broken. Nobody rushed to fill the heavy silence. Some moments simply deserve quiet. Lily looked up at me. Dad? I knelt beside her just like I had 6 months earlier on Christmas Eve. Yes, sweetheart? She glanced toward her grandmother. Are you still mad? I smiled gently. How I feel isn't the most important thing right now. Lily frowned. It isn't? I shook my head. You were hurt too. She looked at Margaret, then Emily, and finally me. What happens now? I rested a hand on her shoulder. That decision belongs to you. She did not answer. Instead, she walked slowly across the yard. Margaret stood perfectly still, not reaching out, not asking for forgiveness, not even speaking. Halting right in front of her grandmother, Lily looked up. My ornament isn't perfect anymore, Margaret nodded. I know. Lily smiled just a little. Neither is our family. Then she embraced her grandmother, who wept quietly on her shoulder. Emily leaned against me. I wasn't expecting that. I whispered back. Neither was I. Later, we sat down to eat. The conversation was not forced, just careful. Honestly, you and I both know how exhausting fake family smiles can be. This quiet felt so much more genuine. Afterward, Kevin helped me clean the grill. I'm sorry, he said. I should have carried more of the load. I looked at him. You can start now. He nodded, and for once I believed him. As the sun set, Margaret walked over one last time. I know things can't simply go back to how they used to be, Margaret confessed as we stood together. They won't, I answered honestly. She lowered her head. I know. We will visit, she added, looking up hopefully. But there are going to be boundaries, I told her. I understand, she replied. No insults. There won't be. No comments about Emily. Never again. And if Lily ever feels unwelcome, I began, but Margaret finished the sentence herself. You will leave. Yes, I said. She smiled sadly. I would too. When she drove away that evening, I realized something surprising. I did not feel like I had won. This was never about winning anyway. It was about choosing the people who had quietly chosen me every single day. Once the fireworks faded, Lily fell asleep, with her repaired ornament on her nightstand, leaving Emily and me to sit quietly together on the back porch. She rested her head against my shoulder. Your dad was right, she murmured. I smiled. He usually was. He told you to protect your family. I looked through the window toward Lily's room. I finally did, I whispered. The thing about boundaries is, they do not always push people away. Sometimes they are the only bridge strong enough to rebuild. Love should never require sacrificing your family's dignity. If you and I ever have to choose between keeping a false peace and protecting the ones we love, we must choose protection. Thank you for walking through this memory with me, and remember, you are never alone.